Good evening, everybody. This is exercise 6.2 Q4. This is the exercise where you have to translate and then do a derivation. Now, we are told in the directions that these are all valid arguments, so there is a derivation to be had. We should start by producing a translation key. I will do that for the first one or two, but since these videos can only be 15 minutes and I want to get through all the odd numbered problems, I might start skipping that step later. I'll say what the letters stand for, but I might not write them all out. Okay, so number one, first sentence, Iran will not go to the war with the United States. Second sentence, therefore, either Iran will not go to the war with the U.S. or Australia will go. So therefore is generally a conclusion indicator. Most of these, I think all of them are straightforwardly in order. In other words, the conclusion, I think, comes last in all of them. Again, remember, that's not always going to be the case in English sentences, but for this exercise, it pretty much is. So we'll just go from start to finish. So the first sentence, Iran will not go to war with the U.S. Now remember, the word not should never be part of the translation. That's always going to be represented with the tilde. So I here will stand for Iran will go to war with the United States. And then the other sentence we need is Australia will go to war with the United States. All right, so those are only two sentences we have in this problem. Again, pick a letter that makes sense. So I for Iran, A for Australia. But remember that same letter has to be the same sentence consistently, and you need different letters for different sentences. So if it was Iran and Iraq, then you couldn't use I for both. You'd have to switch up the letters. Okay, so our first premise, Iran will not go to war with the U.S. So since we're doing a proof here, we need to number our premises. And the first premise then is just simply not I, okay? So again, just a reminder, don't translate the not in the sentence. Use the tilde to represent the not. All right, and that's our only premise, so we go to conclusion. I use the backslash to separate the conclusion. It's on the keyboard, unlike the 3-dot symbol or the box in the book. He puts a box around the conclusion. But again, just try to stick with simple keyboard stuff so you don't have to waste a lot of time. So our conclusion here is either Iran, so notice either or here, so our conclusion is a disjunction. First disjunct, either Iran will not, so again, it's either not I, or, here's our or, Australia will go to war, so that's just plain old A, all right? So that's our premise, conclusion. Can put a line under that to separate it from the rest of the derivation. This is a very obviously straightforward derivation. We can do this in one step. Since our premise is not I, our conclusion is a disjunction, we want to introduce disjunction, right? And remember, you can do the disjunction introduction rule anytime you have one sentence, because you know if this is true, then this in any disjunction is also going to be true. So the first, number one is simple, one-step derivation. Okay, number three, we have an if, either or, then that, right? So again, do these sentence by sentence, like break everything down into as small parts as possible, okay? So let's focus on the first sentence. Notice it's an if, and then there's an either or, and then there's the then, and then this. Whoops. Okay, so just looking at the first sentence, now we need a couple sentences. So either Ellen or Francis guilty. So we need E is going to be Ellen is guilty. F will equal Francis is guilty. And then over here, George will tell the police. G. George will tell the So given those abbreviations, we can abbreviate our first sentence as follows. If, so it's an if-then, so it's a conditional. But notice our antecedent here is an either-or sentence. So that means our antecedent is going to be a disjunction, either Ellen or Francis. Okay? So that all comes after the if, before the then, so that's the whole antecedent. Consequent is an atomic sentence. George will tell the police, just plain old G. All right, sentence number 2. Helen is not guilty only if Francis is guilty. Okay, so we need another sentence there for Helen. Helen is guilty. Again, notice I'm not translating the not. That's going to get represented by the negation, by the tilde. So we've got Helen is guilty and Francis is guilty, which we already have. Okay, so this is now an only if sentence. So remember, with only if, you can just substitute the conditional for only if. Whatever comes before only if is going to be the antecedent. So in this case, Helen is not guilty, so not H. And then only if. And then what comes after the only if is Francis is guilty, so F. So you should maybe go back and review all that stuff about the difference between plain old if and only if and if and only if. Okay, but for only if, it's easiest to remember, just drop in the horseshoe for only if and keep the order the same. Okay, premise 3. George will not tell the police. So again, not G. And our conclusion, therefore, Helen is guilty. So H. And conjunction, Ellen is not guilty. Not E. Oops. All right, so that's our argument. Again, I'll put a line underneath it to distinguish the premises from the rest of the derivation. Okay, so now when you're doing derivations, you should always work in both directions. Work from the premises, apply whatever rules you can apply, but also keeping an eye on your conclusion. Where am I trying to get to? So I'm trying to get to H, I'm trying to get to not E. If I get both those separate, I can use a conjunction introduction rule to put them together. All right. Now, the most clear rule I can apply here is on line 1, I have a conditional, and on line 3, I have the negation of the consequent. So that suggests MT, modus tollens. Those are the inputs for modus tollens, a conditional and the negation of the consequent. And as output, I get the negation of the antecedent, so not E or F. And now I can do a De Morgan's rule to get not E and not F. So the De Morgan's rule has the effect of pushing the negation inside the parentheses onto both sentences and changing the disjunction to a conjunction. All right, so that's De Morgan's on line 4. So now I can do a conjunction elimination on 5 to get not E. So there's half of my conclusion. Okay, so the other half is H. H is up here, so I have to figure out how to get H out of here. Well, I have not F here, and if you remember the rule we just did, modus tollens, you can maybe see how we're going to proceed. So again, we get not F by the same rule, right? So we've had a conjunction. We can get not E by itself. We can get not F by itself. And now not F is the negation of the consequent of this conditional. So that means we can use modus tollens to get the negation of its antecedent. So that's modus tollens 2(7). Right? So we have a conditional, we have the negation of its consequent. That gives us the negation of its antecedent. So the negation of not H is not H. But again, we need plain old H here, so we're going to have to do the double negation rule to get rid of those two negations. And then our last step then can be the conjunction introduction. So that's conjunction introduction of 6 and 9, right? So line 6, if you look, that's where we got not E. Line 9, if you look, that's where we got H. Okay, so that one's a little more complicated. Okay, so number 5. Okay, so first sentence, neither Salvador nor Juanita is going to the party. So again, that's a neither nor sentence. Well, let's get our translation first. I'm just going to skip the translations. I'm running out of time. Okay, so it's a neither nor sentence. So we know not, either, or. All right, that's how neither nor is translated. So our neither nor, Salvador is going to the party. Let's call that S. And then second part, Juanita is going to the party. Call that J. All right, so neither Salvador nor Juanita is going to the party. And then our next sentence is therefore, so that's our conclusion. So backslash. If Patrick isn't going to the party, so we'll call P is Patrick is going to the party. So this is saying if Patrick isn't going to the party, and that's an if, so it's a conditional, then Salvador isn't. All right, so remember, S stands for Salvatore is going to the party. So we've just got one premise and a conclusion. And there's really only one thing we can do given this premise as it stands. We can do the De Morgan's rule to get not S and not J. De Morgan's 1. So again, De Morgan pushes the negation in onto both sentences and changes the disjunction to a conjunction. Okay, so now we can get not S by itself by conjunction elimination of 2. And now you'll notice we've got this sentence in the conclusion that doesn't show up in the premises. And if you remember the one tip in the book, and if you remember we talked about this when we were talking about, there's one rule, or there's a rule that allows you to introduce new stuff, and that is the disjunction introduction rule. But you might be thinking, well, this isn't a disjunction, it's a conditional. Right. But remember the substitution rule, material conditional, allows you to change conjunctions into conditionals and vice versa. So if we do this, P or not S, by disjunction introduction of 3. Now we can use our material conditional rule to change that into that conditional. It's MC4. So again, you had to notice, okay, here's a sentence that doesn't appear in the premise anywhere, so it means we're going to have to introduce it. So disjunction introduction is how you can do that. Another way you can introduce stuff is with the subderivation rules. And you might have thought, looking at this, well, maybe I'll try a conditional proof. I'll say not P, want not S, which you could do, but notice having not P doesn't really do anything for you, right? It doesn't give you anything to work with. So now you'd probably next have to try to do S for reductio, and then you could do the De Morgan's, not S and not J, by De Morgan's of 2, and then you could do not S by itself by elimination, and then you could get S by so you could do it this way, but you can see it's a lot easier to do this way. All right. Okay, I'm about out of time, so I'll do the other problems in a separate video. Stay tuned.